Tec Sounds presents EduTrends.
Welcome to the EduTrends webcast and podcast brought to you by the Institute for the Future of Education. My name is José Pepe Escamilla. I'm Associate Director of the Institute for the Future of Education. And today's guest is Gary A. Bolles, author of the book, The Next Rules of Work, Chair for the Future of Work at Singularity University, and partnered in Charrette. It's a pleasure to have you here, Gary.
Pepe, it's so great to be able to have a conversation with you.
We are in the middle of the end of the International Conference of Education and Innovation in our campus in Monterrey. And one of the things that we have talking about is the impact that technology is going to have in higher education and lifelong learning. What can you tell us about?
So first off, I have tremendous empathy for educators and administrators in this era because you didn't choose to be around at the time of a global pandemic. You didn't choose to be around at the time of artificial intelligence tools suddenly taking off. And I know that there's so many things that you're trying to do to provide such tremendous value to learners around the world. And then when you hit these very disruptive times, it can make it very difficult to continue to try to deliver on that mission. But technology has always transformed education at work, just typically at fairly slower paces. So the calculator was considered by math teachers to be an enemy. I'm old
enough to have that.
Yeah. So think of how long, how many battles there were as to whether or not students could have them in the classroom. And then, for instance, for our SAT tests, you can bring a calculator, but you can only bring one set of extra batteries, and that's it. And if you didn't bring your calculator, you can't ask anybody else for one. And if you do, that is a violation because they think that you might be cheating. And so we get these new technologies. We think that we're adopting them and integrating them into the way we learn. But the truth is, even today, there's so many teachers, for instance, that tell their students, you can't bring the cell phone into my classroom. Mm-hmm. Or if you look at the adoption of the internet, you look at the adoption of Wikipedia, each one of those were disruptive technologies that many teachers had great challenges in trying to figure out how to weave into the learning experience. And I think we're at that same inflection point now, not just because we've gone through this global experiment in distributed and hybrid learning, but because we've got this new wave of tools that is likely to transform an awful lot of the way we even think about teaching going forward.
Yes, you remind me of a quote in the book of Neil Postman. I don't remember the name of the book right now, sorry. There's a Greek classic philosopher, I think it was Socrates, that was complaining about the invention of writing because students will become lazy and will not learn by memorize the books or the poems or the discourse. No.
And Aristotle actually complained that if technology kept advancing, there would be robots that would literally play the harp and humans wouldn't need to do it anymore. And so we've always been afraid of the next wave of technology, but we haven't always been able or ready, willing, or had the support to go through the process of figuring out how to integrate it and actually leverage it for learning.
Okay. So what changes you foresee in education in particular with these technologies? Will it replace teachers? Will it? What will happen? Because many people are afraid. I had a conversation with some people of the team of the Observatory of the Institute for the Future of Education, and I showed them what ChatGPT could do, and she said, I will mark this day on my calendar, and I think I will lose my job, no? So that's their visceral reaction of people.
No, absolutely, and it's perfectly understandable. I'm a recovering journalist. I used to be the editor of technology magazines, 6 different technology magazines. And in the 1990s, I co-founded a magazine we called the Internet's first newspaper, Interactive Week. And as we were developing the newspaper and talking about all these changes from the internet, we all looked around at each other. We said, we are chronicling the demise of our own industry. We are actually writing stories about how all these technologies are going to transform the media business, newspapers, magazines. And we realized, we're going to be out of a job in a pretty short period of time. Now, that wasn't completely true because what ended up happening is at least in the United States, 50% of the employment was lost in those industries over 25 years. But virtually all those people shifted into digital media businesses, which were actually different ways of being able to distribute information. So this is the way I would ask educators to be thinking about it, is we always go through these same kinds of reactions. The first is curiosity. It's very interesting. Then we suddenly have the implications hit us and we feel like we're going to be out of a job. We become very, very nervous. Then we start to realize that if we actually leverage those technologies, we don't see them as enemies, we don't see them as threats, we weave them into how we teach and how we learn, then we actually can reach more people. We can make the kinds of learning more adaptive to the needs of different kinds of people. And then we can actually become better curators of the learning experience.
Very interesting answer. And well, you're talking there to educators. What about leadership, presidents of universities? What will you tell them?
So I had a discussion with, I think it was 40 of the rectors from universities around Latin America yesterday. And I apologized ahead of time by saying, I don't have all good news. Educational institutions as institutions are at an inflection point. In the same way we had to rethink what a media business was, I have a long article on medium.com called Unbundling Higher Education. I co-produced a conference in 2010 on the future of higher education. And then in this article, I talked about how I thought, especially higher education, was going to transform. And it will also impact secondary education as well. The basic suggestion I would give to those who lead these organizations is, if you think of these as ways of transforming that platform of learning, you will become far more open to a range of possibilities of the ways you deliver value to your constituents, your students, their parents, the downstream employers that hire them. If you think of these as opportunities to transform your institution and your organization, then you can be far more prepared to be able to continually adapt, because these technologies are only going to increase in pace of impacting the classroom experience, impacting how we even think about homework. And so I offer a different lens or a different perspective to those who lead and say, get that vision of the future, understand how it's very likely the institution of learning will change, and then what are the steps we need to follow to be able to help our existing constituents, our teachers, our administrators, our students and parents, to be able to continually adapt as we move towards that future. It's inevitable. It's pretty likely to come at a faster pace than many would have liked, but it offers so many opportunities for the transformation of business models, the transformation of the learning experience, even the transformation of who you can actually help to learn, that if you embrace it as an opportunity, there's great examples of institutions that have already done that and have been able to go through that transformation journey.
Thanks for your answer. And I think it's complicated because you have to think on different futures. No, is there only one future? Because technology in universities is one part of the story, but there's also startups that are trying to do things that traditional universities are doing, but doing that faster, cheaper, more flexible.
Yeah, I call that, so if you think of ed tech technologies and you think of the startups especially that are impacting learning, there's 60,000 startups in the world funded by $6 billion worth of capital that are focused on ed tech. So the Chinese have a phrase, the death of 1,000 cuts. It's the death of 60,000 cuts. And so you can think of each one of them as looking at the learning process as a market, and some are going to empower existing educational institutions to transform. But many are going to offer new kinds of learning experiences. They're going to have new business models. They're going to have different ways of approaching the process of learning. And what we found in the media business is that eroded our businesses to the point where there are still radio stations, there are still magazines, there's still newspapers. The business has changed dramatically so that a tremendous number of these upstarts, we call them Google and Facebook, have created completely new markets to be able to have access to information. And if you think of that as a longer cycle for higher education, it's going to take longer because there's a variety of dynamics of just how that industry works in various countries, especially because of regulation and because of the feeder process from elementary school systems. But if you think of that as continuing to transform, then I think what is the opportunity is to be looking at how you can leverage these technologies, but also the changes in the business model and insulate yourself against some of the future global changes. Very few people saw the massive impact of a virus as being this incredible accelerator so that educational organizations had to suddenly bake in the whole process of remote and hybrid learning. And so few were doing it before that point that it was a rounding error. So education should take that as an example of how, given the right combination of incentives and disincentives, it can transform overnight. It was messy, it wasn't fun for a lot of people, but look at how rapidly so many educational institutions around the world went through that adaptation process. If we keep on having that same level of urgency in how we transform ourselves in the next phases, then you can hopefully get more and more of the stakeholders, I call it the coalition of the willing, inside educational institutions that want to continually leverage these opportunities.
So now that we don't have a crisis, no, right now, I have heard stories of people saying, well, in our university, we had a license of Blackboard because of the pandemic. We bought the license. But now that the pandemic is finished, we're canceling the Blackboard license because there's no need for that. No, so let's go back to regular stuff in the classroom. And I am amazed that in Spanish we say that humans are the only animals that don't learn by experience. Because you need at least for resilience of the university for things that can come in the future, and also for flexibility of the students. So how do you think we can keep this motivation for change after the pandemic?
So I often suggest that it's a series of steps for people who lead, especially for those who lead organizations. And I hope that it's at least comforting to people in educational institutions. We see exactly the same response by people who lead corporations and businesses. When Elon Musk says he buys Twitter and then he fires half of them and tells the other, you have to work twice as hard and you've got to be in the office. That's no different than a university saying we don't need Blackboard anymore. It's throwing away all the things that you learned about how to adapt and going back to what I call the old rules of work or the old rules of learning. So there's a couple of steps that I think are very important. The first is to build a shared vision. So what ends up happening is organizations that transform themselves need to all have a manifesto or some other thing, some other way of articulating what the vision that they're trying to drive towards. The second is you have to build the coalition of the willing, because you're going to find many within, especially educational institutions, have a fixed mindset. They want to go back to teaching.
Like faculty and staff.
They want to go back to teaching Sanskrit, even though no students want Sanskrit anymore.
Okay.
But build the magnets that draw those that have a growth mindset, those that want to experiment. And this is something that your institute does amazingly well. It creates this strong attractor for people that want to be part of that coalition of change. The third is you need to find ways to be able to drive innovation. If some organizations, you can have a courageous leader who is able to say, this is the way we're going. If you look at Michael Crow at ASU, if you look at Paul LeBlanc at Southern New Hampshire University, they said, this is the direction we're going. Who's with me? And but in other cases, especially organizations that have very long-term brands and have been around for a long time, I say this is what humans do. We bungee cord back to the way that we used to do things. And so that's what's going to happen for many of those institutions. And they have to experiment on the edge. They need an institute, or they need programs where it's not threatening in the main part of the organization or the main part of the campus, but they're experimenting with new technologies, new business models, and more of the people that want to be part of that future can join it.
Yes, not all institutions can have a strong leader, charismatic leader, I will say. So you have to find different ways to adapt. And how these changes affect universities that are, I would say, serving different sectors of the market.
Yeah. So first off, those that are more vocationally oriented and more technically oriented, they typically already have a process by which they know the value they are delivering to industry. So they normally have relationships and communication with the downstream customer of a degree, which is called an employer. The near-term customer is the student and maybe the parents and maybe the government if they're also helping with the funding, or in our case, huge student loans. But the downstream customer is an employer. And so technology-focused or vocationally focused institutions often have already a process of adaptation to understand what the skills demand is. Michael Fung, he went through a process in Singapore of building relationships between industry and the educational institutions with Skills Future to build that connective tissue. With other organizations and institutions that are less connected to that downstream partner, that downstream customer, the more that they can build the kinds of connections to understand what their graduates can do. My son went to Oberlin University Oberlin College in the U.S., and it's a liberal arts college, but they have a huge number of their students hired by Google, not to be engineers. They don't even have an engineering program, to be sales and marketing people. So they realized, we're preparing these liberal arts students to go and work in these tech companies, but to do non-technical work, but we have to prepare them to be very, very adaptive. And so this is, I think, a tremendous opportunity for a lot of institutions, is to build that connective tissue with industry and the connective tissue with their communities so that they're continuing to ensure there's going to be lots and lots of people that are going to be disrupted by these technologies, lots and lots of industries that will be disrupted. How they can help more and more people to be able to go through that adaptation process is critical.
Yes. I was looking for your book. I think I have it here on the other side.
You have a prop. Okay.
You recently wrote this book.
Yeah.
The next rules of work.
Yes.
What are the next rules of work?
Prop. So the most basic rules, when you think of how each of us as humans deal with disruption, how our organizations, our communities, our industries deal with disruption, there's no magic wand that helps us to all suddenly become very adaptive and deal with change. But if you buy the premise that we're going to continue to have what we call exponential change at Singularity University, if you picture in your newspaper when we first saw the infection rates of the virus, it followed this curve. And that's actually exponential, where it doubles again and again. In that case, every week or month, it was doubling in a lot of communities. Well, that's the way that you can think about the growth of the technologies that often impact our lives as well. And humans, we think linearly. We don't think exponentially. So there's this gap between what is happening in the world and the way that we think. And so what we've seen over and over again is if you help people with three things, they can be far more adaptive. And this is true for individuals, organizations, communities. You help them to have a mindset that they can continually adapt. We call this often a growth mindset. They need to have a 21st century skill set. And I often talk about the English acronym is PACE, problem solvers who are adaptive, creative, and with empathy. And then they need to be able to leverage a 21st century tool set. And that's a set of techniques like design thinking and technologies such as artificial intelligence, which can help each of us to amplify our work and to be able to adapt more rapidly.
Okay, and how should we be preparing for the future of work, or is it already here?
So first off, when we say the future of work, many people, I can paint a vision of what work might look like, the scenarios for work in 2050.
That would be interesting.
And talk about all these, I do this all the time, and talk about all these amazing technologies transforming our work. And when I do that talk, people, their minds are blown. Oh my God, flying cars and artificial intelligence assistants. And then I say, no, every single one of those technologies exists today. There are 32 companies around the world that are building flying cars. I've told people for years, there's going to be artificial intelligence where you will type in a prompt and it will come back and write an entire paper for you. And then along comes ChatGPT as a great example. And now, okay, now I see it. You're right. The future is here. So most people, what they care about the future of work is tomorrow. What should I do tomorrow? What should my company do tomorrow? What should my educational institution do tomorrow? And my answer is you start to build the process of how humans can continually adapt. You help to develop mindsets. We often talk about 10x thinking and moonshot thinking, how you could do bigger and bigger approaches to solving problems. We talk about developing skills much more rapidly, not just, I don't want to offend any in our audience, but not just 4-year degrees or 6-year degrees or 8-year degrees. There's some arenas, some bodies of knowledge that are necessary for that length of time, but there's lots of other things we can develop skills for that can happen in a much more rapid time. And then leveraging the tool set, all of us can leverage this tool set now. We can all go online and play with these tools to understand how we might leverage them in our lives, even if it's going to something like the tool Midjourney, and you could actually tell it to draw pictures for you that could be the comic book you show to your kindergartner. But when you told a completely new story to them, you don't have to be an artist to do that. You've got these new tools that allow you to experiment with ways that you can actually do tremendously creative new acts.
But what you said sounds compelling, and I would say
I hope it's inspiring.
Inspiring and compelling.
It might be scary.
But when I think there are 8 billion people in the world that have to start to change their mindset, no? And how many companies, there are many companies that have to change their culture around that. How can we achieve, I was quoting Singularity, exponential change in organizations? Because if we go one by one, it will take us a lot of time to adapt.
So organizations that have already gone through this process of helping to develop a much more adaptive mindset to be able to leverage this 21st century skill set and then have made an investment in the tool set, they've already proven that they're better at adapting. If you look at one of my clients is a company called Pax8, a tech company, but they had offices, real offices, when the pandemic hit. And they believed that they were completely adapted to distributed work in 36 hours. So I'm not saying every single organization should have that capacity to do this tremendous, dramatic change. Instead, if the people who lead in organizations are the ones who are exhibiting these new tendencies, are showing much more of a growth mindset, there's plenty of examples of organizations around the world that are building these as internal capacities. If you look at Novartis, it's a 100,000 person pharma company. The CEO talks all the time about the latest course that he just took. They think of themselves as a learning organization. There's an online learning platform that they use. They've built a skills database of their employees. They have internal project marketplaces where people can find projects and have the right skills match up to the problems that need to be solved. And so if you think of that as an ongoing process, any organization, even smaller organizations, can start to make these commitments. What you need is people that are leading the way, some level of courageous leadership. You need people to be able to have some type of North Star or Southern Cross themselves. The more you see that there's something you're fascinated by, something you want to continue to learn, some problem you want to continue to solve, the more you are driven in your own work, the more you have a magnet that pulls you. And those people are the ones that typically are the most able to adapt.
Thanks. So there will also be many people that will be having to change not only their jobs, but their careers, no? And there's something that also has been announced several times. I think we're already seeing that happen somewhere in the world. How massive that will be, and what can we do for that? And when I say change of career, I mean it's not change of job. It's because your job becomes irrelevant. You have to do something else. You will not find a job like that.
So, you know that my father wrote a book called "What Color Is Your Parachute?" that was sort of the world's career manual, and he updated it every year for over a period of over 40 years. And he had an understanding of how each of us as humans make decisions about our work and our careers. And he found out that there's really three things that we need to learn that will allow us to be able to continually adapt in our own careers, in our own work. But first, before I walk through the three things, he said, what is really critical for people that find, for instance, there's no more work in what they were trained for. You were trained to be a journalist, and there's no more work in magazines, or you trained to be a plumber, and now you've got robots doing plumbing. So the first is to change the mindset where you no longer think of yourself as being a journalist or being a plumber. You're a person who has skills. And if you keep yourself, if you pull that anchor away where you just think of somebody who can continually solve problems, you will find it much easier to adapt. And so that's a mindset shift for people that are going through disruptive change in terms of no longer having access to the work that they used to have. But then my father suggested there's 3 steps that each of us can go through. The first is what? How do you learn about yourself, the unique parts of you? What are your skills? What do you love to do? What kind of problems do you love to solve? The second part is where? Where could you use those skills? What are the scenarios for the kinds of work that you can do? If you were working as a journalist, you're very good with information. You're very good at working with people. There's so many other things you could be doing. And then finally, the how is the steps that you would go through. And so what my father found is that if you help someone to go through this process, hopefully starting when they're even in college, to learn how to know more about themselves, how to know more about what the options for work might be, and then to have the techniques to be able to find or create that work, you'll be able to continually adapt. And a lot of young people do this already. They might be working on a day job, but they're driving for Uber at night and they're working on a startup with their friends. I call this a portfolio of work. They're already creating this changing mix of these elements in their lives. And they might still have day jobs in the future, but they're much more adaptive in thinking about how they could use their skills to solve new problems.
Thanks for your answer. So we need to be more problem solvers. So problem solvers have an advantage.
Absolutely. I say all the time, work is really just 3 things. It's a problem to be solved, it's the tasks we perform to solve those problems, and it's our human skills. So if we fall in love with problems, think of your engineering students, think of your marketing students. They've found a set of problems to fall in love with. Then they learned how to use and develop new skills to be able to perform tasks and solve those problems. What I encourage more and more people to do is to fall in love with problems of society, problems of the planet, ways that we can actually help to build better societies and to be able to strengthen our planet. It's wonderful to think about how to sell more things and that sort of stuff, but it's also wonderful to be thinking about how you can find problems in the world that you think can actually solve a more nagging problem for society.
Thanks a lot, Gary, with this call to solve big problems of humanity and the society. We finish our podcast of today. I thank you. It was fascinating and enjoyable, and I hope our audience will like it too.
Oh, thank you so much, Pepe.
It's great to have you here back soon.
All right, absolutely. It's been great to be here.
For more information, visit observatory.tech.mx/EduTrends podcast and ife.tech.mx. A special thanks to Tecnológico de Monterrey, the Institute for the Future of Education, and the Tec Sounds team. Tec Sounds producer Miguel Mejia. EduTrends producers Esteban Venegas and Cristian Igosa. Stay tuned and play Tec Sounds in your favorite podcast app for other great shows and content.